There are 3 reverb secrets that professional music producers are using to create depth, width, and separation between the instruments in the mix. And it can be the difference between your mixes sounding like this. And boring and flat like this. So in this video, you're gonna learn how to set up your reverb to create that sense of space, clarity, and airiness without reverb sounding too much or too muddy, so that your mixes sound as good as your favorite reference tracks in terms of the space. Let's talk about secret number 1, whole reverb. So if you ever been to opera or museum, this is what a whole reverb is like. Think of the whole like the biggest natural reverb in the mix that creates the feeling of high ceiling in your track. It's spacious, long, big, and based on that, you can create variations of the whole reverb in the track. So we can listen to it, and a good example will be with the vocal. So if I send the vocal to the whole reverb, you will instantly hear how nice it sounds. Watch me do my thing. This is how a whole reverb usually sounds. So if we now listen with the rest of the instruments, and we can take the plug, for example, and send it to the whole. Watch me do my thing. Do my thing, stop. And let's say without the vocal. So you can hear that it creates that high ceiling, like spacious feeling in the track. So let's talk about the whole reverb settings. So those settings are just approximate. Do not copy my values. So you want to play with settings depending on the genre, on the tempo. So I make music like 120 to 130 BPM usually. So the most common will be 2.5 to 3 seconds. So the slower is the track, the longer the reverb could be, because otherwise if the track is too fast, the tail of the reverb will create unnecessary mud. Keep that in mind, right? So let's play with the length and see how it affects the sound a little bit more. So we can go to the whole here. So this is a 2.8. Let's say we do it like 2 seconds. Like, it's okay, but I think it's a little bit too short. Let's say if we make it like 4, excuse me, like, yeah, 3, 4. This is also a bit too much. So yeah, usually a good amount is to start with 2.5, 2.3. I'd say 2.5 is a sweet spot, right? Pretty cool, right? And then we can reduce that a little bit. The next parameter is going to be the width. Again, there's no one size fits all. You really want to play with the width, but usually for the whole, you want to have a lot of width. So starting from 85 to 100% is good. Let's just experiment and see what's going to happen when we change the width to... That's definitely too narrow. So the wider is, the more width we have, the more like spacious and like 3D sounds feel. So you can definitely play with that to create interesting separation between instruments. So for example, if we take this one and play those two. And then the pre-delay. So the bigger is the reverb, the more pre-delay you want to have. So for the whole, it's usually going to be around 15 to like up to 20, 30, 50 milliseconds. So check it out, how much we can change the sound if we push the pre-delay to like 50. So for bigger spaces, this is something that can create a bit more like 3D depth in your mixes. So that's it for the whole reverb. One more thing is EQ settings. Depending on what kind of space you want to design, because some halls could be very bright, some halls could be dark, but usually the hall is a little bit darker than the other rooms. So let's now talk about the secret number 2, which is going to be the plate reverb. Plate reverb is a type of artificial reverb that uses a big, thin metal plate to create echoes. So you strike the metal sheet and then it vibrates, and then those vibrations slowly die down. And then microphones pick up these vibrations and you hear a reverb effect, which is a series of tiny echoes that blend together. This is a really cool type of reverb. It is, if the whole is like more natural, this one is artificial, but it's really, really cool. So it tends to give a smooth, warm, bright echo effect. I'll show you that. And it has a unique character that's different from room, that's different from the whole, or like other digital reverbs. So if we go back to the project, and if we listen to the plate reverb on the vocal, you're gonna hear the difference between the whole and plate reverb. So let's double check that we have everything here.
Watch me do my thing, do my thing.
And then the whole reverb.
Watch me do my thing, stop.
And the plate.
Watch me do my thing, watch me do my thing.
And we can do here, for example, let's do modern.
Watch me do my thing, stop.
Let's go here.
Watch me do my thing, stop. I'm going big, drop. I'm going in.
So it has that here modern compared to plate.
Watch me do my,
You can hear it has that smooth character.
watch me do my thing.
Let's talk about the purpose of the plate reverb. On this schematic mix, the diagram, the lead is in the center of focus. All the elements are positioned in the room reverb, and there's only a little bit of space behind them. So I use plate reverb to emphasize the space behind my lead instruments or vocals in the mix, and the bright sound of plate reverb makes the instruments more defined and focused in the mix. So for example, if we have these vocals and we just send them to the plate, and the rest if we take the plugs and we just use the whole reverb on them, you're gonna hear that it will give you an interesting separation. I'm gonna exaggerate the reverb a little bit. It doesn't have to sound like perfectly clean at this point.
Watch me do my thing.
So let's send it to.
Watch me do my thing. Stop.
So pay attention to the difference of the plug, how the space behind the plug feels, and the space behind the lead vocal.
Do my thing, stop. I'm going big.
Then we can do this one as well. This one we are also sending to the plate. Or we can send it to the hole.
I'm going big, drop.
And then once again the plug. So depending how much signal you send to different reverbs, you can get different amounts of focus, separation. So again, you have to play with that to make sure that you get best results with this. And we can also do another one. Let's say we do. And again, this one we are sending to the hole. And that gives us a very interesting separation. So this is the plate reverb, and now let's talk about the settings. So depending on the plugin that you're going to be using, you can usually select the plate mode or different modes in your reverb. Here I just use the preset, but usually boosting highs will be a good thing for the plate. Again, don't take it like as again the only way of doing this plate thing. I'm just giving you the tools. So you don't need a dedicated plate reverb plugin, but it's cool if you have it. I just use Pro R. It's amazing reverb. that I really like. So for the length, it's usually going to be 1.2 to 1.6 for 125 to 130, width 50 to 70%, because we want to make sure that there's a bit of separation between rooms, and the pre-delay, so 5 to 20 milliseconds. So remember, the shorter is the reverb, the shorter is the pre-delay time. So let's play a little bit with reverb settings so that you can see and you can test how it sounds here. So let's do the width. We can use width like 90%, but then we just don't have enough separation between the plug. So it would be better to use about 50% here. So it is a little bit more centered. With the pre-delay, I'm using a 22 actually, which is quite a bit, but it's fine. Just feel free to play with this stuff. This is just like the general or basic settings that you can use for that, and play with the EQ, can play with the brightness. Actually, yeah, the vocal is has a lot of sibilance, so this is why I think brightness, we can reduce it. Yeah, I really like this plugin. I'm not sponsored, but it's just really cool. And now let's talk about the last reverb, which is, I forgot to write it here, secret number 3, which is going to be the room reverb. So room reverb, if you listen to my voice right now, I do have a bit of this natural reverb in my room, and it's not like very noticeable, it's not very obvious, but it just sounds natural. And this is the type of reverb that you must have in your mix. I mean, most of the times, right? So if you look at the diagram here, right, we have a little bit of shadow, right? So pay attention to how it looks. I hope like you can see through YouTube, right? And this is going to be without, right? Just boring and flat, no shadow behind the text either, right? So here, once again, we can do like this. Now, flat and boring. So this is what room reverb essentially does to your sounds. It creates that sense of natural depth to the instruments, to the mix, and it's almost like glues everything together. So I'm again using the same plugin, and we can listen to the room reverb on different sounds, right? So if we go here, let's use the room on the vocal. So you almost don't recognize it that much, right? And then let's listen with the drums. I'm gonna send the drums to the room a little bit more. Let's reduce the... Let's push a little bit more. Especially with the drums. So it is there, but again, it's not very obvious. So you can hear the room reverb, but it's not very obvious, which is again the whole point of this type of reverb, right? So once you send all your instruments to this room, and it's gonna depend like where you want to position them, right? So by sending different amount of reverb signal to different reverbs, you can position the instruments in the mix in a really nice way. So we can take the vocal, for example. And it just feels like nice and natural, right? So let's now listen to the rest of the synths. Vocal, I'm just sending to the room, and that's it for now. And listen to the separation between the elements. Right, sounds pretty cool. And let's now break down the settings of the room reverb. So length 0.3 to 0.7. Sometimes could be 1 second. Again, really depends on the track, on the vibe. Width 10 to 30% here. I usually like keeping my rooms very narrow, sometimes almost mono, just because it allows for other rooms to take a little bit more space. And this is not like a very this reverb does not need a lot of width. And also keep in mind that if you make all the rooms width, again, we are lacking contrast, and the rooms are going to be overlapping each other, which is something that we don't want, right? So
Watch me do my thing. Do my thing. I'm going big. Going big.
so we can play. Maybe in this case, it's going to be like around 20, 30.
Watch me do my thing. Do my thing.
Could be cool. Again, just be creative, and you have to really test. That's the most important thing in music. You have to test how it sounds to make sure that you are doing you're making the right decisions for the track. Okay. And the last thing is going to be tips for clean reverb to make sure that it sounds transparent. We don't have any mud and stuff like that. So first is going to be the reverb. Then I usually like EQing that until 300. That's going to be cleaning the mud. Then we are side chaining from the kick, and we are side chaining the reverb from the leads. And this is very, very cool. So let's take the for example, we can take the pluck and one of the lead sounds here, right? Drop minimal. Yeah, cool. So let's bring back the automation and have a listen to the whole reverb first without this processing. So no side chaining, no nothing. So first the EQ. There's a little bit of mud that we don't need, and it's not going to be helpful for the mix. The next thing, which is really, really cool, it's side chaining. So I'm going to do full band side chain. It's going to give us a very obvious, almost like too much pump in the track, but sometimes it is very, very cool. And I used it, but usually I would split the band. We have a lot of this pump. And then if you split this, it just allows for the kick to punch through a little bit more, which is really cool. Because then we are just side chaining the low frequencies of the reverb, and we can duck them for more clean sound. And one more thing is going to be spectral side chaining. I use track spacer, so it ducks the reverb a little bit more and gives you a nice and clean sound. You can hear there's still like a little bit of muddiness, not very clear kind of sound, but with a track spacer, it's super cool. So again, I'm exaggerating the reverb in all the examples so you can really hear, but the good rule of like a rule of thumb for reverb is that it should be enough and it should feel natural, but it's almost like that the reverb is not very noticeable, not very audible. So let's talk about the final thing, which is going to be the another tip for clean reverb and how to get even more control over the reverb, so you can dial in exactly how much reverb you need for the track. Okay, so in this example, I have a lot of reverb, and you can have a look at the automation. You can see that I have a lot of automation throughout the whole track. So once you finish with automation, you can then, on the return channels, you can control how much reverb you want. So I really like in the beginning hearing my reverb, what it does to the mix, how it impacts the elements, and so on. And after you finish with it, then you can go to your synth channels and reduce the reverb until you get that natural and transparent sound. So for example, this is obviously too much. And then if we reduce it, let's say by 12, you still have pretty cool, transparent, and noticeable reverb in the mix, but it just gives you more control over the sound of the reverb. Because oftentimes I would be doing this, I would finish my reverb and then I would have too much reverb, and I'm pretty sure it happens to you a lot of times. So to avoid that, then again, you can just reduce until you feel like we have enough, and until you feel like it sounds good for your mix. And by the way, if you want to learn how I made this track, I have a full track from scratch course. I'm doing the breaking down the reverb, automations, idea creation. The link is in the comments below. So that's going to be it for this tutorial, my friend. If you want, here I have more tutorials for you if you want to keep learning more about electronic dance music production. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next video. Ciao.